What exactly is Project 2025?
The 922-page plan has been organized by conservative think tank the Heritage Foundation and backed by more than 100 additional groups to serve as a blueprint for the next conservative president.
Proposals in Project 2025 represent profound threats to the American people, to our freedoms, and to our democracy.
Project 2025 is really Moms for Liberty on steroids. The people behind Project 2025 aren't seeking just to undermine public education, they're seeking to undermine our democracy.
Project 2025 is telling us exactly how the conservatives plan to take away the rights of women, people of color, and the LGBTQ community.
On economics, the proposals recommend cutting and restricting the use of food stamps, reducing the corporate income tax rate, cutting rates for high-income investors, and canceling federal student loan forgiveness programs.
United, we have the power to stop threats posed by Project 2025 and build a better future.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this discussion. My name is Greg Sargent. I'm a staff writer at the New Republic, and this conversation is organized in conjunction with Democracy Forward. Our guests are Rotimi Adeoye, an opinion writer at the Daily Beast, Skye Perryman, President and CEO of Democracy Forward, and Congresswoman Maxine Waters. Welcome, everybody. Today, we're going to be talking about Project 2025, which is widely understood at this point as a very specific and detailed blueprint for an authoritarian Trump presidency. We're going to get into what it looks like, how far Trump could get. It's going to be a good conversation. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Congresswoman, would you like to start?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I am extremely supportive of our organizing, not only with New Republic, New Republic, but the Democratic Now organization and every other organization to do everything that we can to educate the public about what 2025 is, how dangerous it is, and how it is a bold, in-your-face description of what would happen with the concentration of power in the president's office under Trump, of course, if he could win, and a way by which they see eliminating public education, getting rid of Head Start, undermining all of the gains made by labor, on and on and on. And so it is very important that we have these discussions and do everything that we can, again, to educate the public and fight against this 2025 project that is organized by the Heritage Foundation with all of Trump's people a part of the development of it.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman. Let's get started. I'll throw out the first question for our panelists. Let's say that Donald Trump wins the election, and starting in January of 2025, he and his allies immediately start implementing the Project 2025 agenda. What would the first 100 days look like as specifically as possible? What's the worst case scenario there, and what's the not as bad scenario? Should we start with, we can start with Rotimi?
Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for having me today. I'm looking forward to a really rich discussion about the dangers of Project 25, but also what we can do as Americans to combat it. And one of the big things that stands out to me in the Project 2025 project is really the Trump administration's very insidious work against the right to vote in democracy. One of the first things that I think that he's going to do, as he's laid out in Project 2025, is moving the work of protecting the right to vote that's currently in the Department of Justice and the Civil Rights Division and moving it to the Criminal Division. And what that is going to do is going to invite so many more frivolous lawsuits on the voter fraud myth that we all know is completely true and has been debunked by Republican and Democrat judges. That is going to be further instituted in the Department of Justice. And all that is for the president is going to be an administrative change that he's going to make with the Attorney General. So that's what I'm really concerned about, is really what's going to happen in the Department of Justice and how it's going to affect our democracy and change the mechanisms. And he doesn't need Congress to do that. All he needs to do is change the attorney general, and once he puts his guy there, and they're going to be very corrupt and erode our democracy with that simple change. That's one thing that really stands out to me for the first 100 days.
Well, I think that Skye, what I think that that gets at very clearly is that while it's often, while Project 2025 is often discussed as a series of policy disagreements, it actually is something much more fundamental. It's really a blueprint for, dramatically weakening democracy on multiple fronts. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. And just to your other question, in the first 100 days of a new administration, Project 2025 purports to really rewrite our federal system in so many ways, from the right to vote to undermining and eradicating certain offices that are in the executive branch, to politicizing our civil service. Democracy Forward put together a people's guide to Project 2025, which you can find on our website at democracyforward.org. And that guide actually goes through the steps that in detail across all of these issues, including the ones the Congresswoman mentioned around labor support, overtime protections, healthcare access, and more. All of the things that they purport that they could do in 100 days with this policy agenda. But to the broader point of our democracy, in 2021, the United States was added to a list of global backsliding democracies following the January 6th insurrection and the disruption of the peaceful transition of presidential power. And the country has remained on that list ever since. And we have had 13 presidential libraries, from President Hoover's library to President Obama's library, and all of them in between, warning of the fragile state of our democracy. It is no coincidence that we are seeing these warning signs as Project 2025 has really revealed such extreme efforts and tactics that a coalition of very far-right organizations and legal institutions would seek to implement at the federal level. Many of these policies are things that we saw in the prior administration and that groups like Democracy Forward and others had to go to court to challenge. And many of them we are already seeing in states and communities across the country with very far-right leadership, from seeking to ban reproductive health care, restrict access to reproductive health care and abortion care, to banning books, to undermining the ability of people to access voting. All of these things that we see in Project 2025 are actually happening in many communities already throughout the country, and of course in our courts, where the Supreme Court has engaged in a range of decisions that are really rolling back people's rights as opposed to protecting them. And so I think that that really shows you the stakes, that this is not just about a series of policy disagreements or about sort of a theoretical discussion about the size of government, but it's really about our overall democracy, our ability to participate in our democracy, and our ability to be on this project of a more bold, more inclusive democracy for all people against a very counter-majoritarian far-right effort to stop that progress.
I think it's probably worth pointing out here that Trump could get in to power and implement this agenda thanks to the counter-majoritarian institution of the Electoral College, and he could have a Republican Senate thanks to the malapportioned Senate, which is also fundamentally anti-majoritarian in key ways. I'd like to focus on a particular aspect of this threat to democracy that's sort of embedded and threaded through this document, which is the weaponization of the Department of Justice. Trump has threatened to prosecute his political opponents in all kinds of ways. Project 2025 offers a blueprint on how Trump actually can do that. But this is sort of couched euphemistically as a proposal to erode the independence of the Justice Department. And it's actually described almost in positive terms as putting it under more direct control of the president, meaning DOJ, which is supposed to sound democratic in the sense that it's supposed to sound like the president, as the elected leader, should control the Justice Department, but it would do the opposite of being democratic. What would the mechanics of it look like if and when Trump does try to use DOJ as a weapon against various opponents? How does he get around the obstacles that will result if and when judges and grand juries are just not willing to throw out the rule of law on his whim? I'd throw that question out for whoever wants to take it.
I mean, I'm happy to speak briefly to it, and then I think others will. I mean, obviously, Rotimi mentioned the ways in which they would seek to recategorize certain, really important protections, like the role that the Department of Justice plays in protecting voting rights, moving that to a criminal division. But there's also proposals to eradicate the independence of the Department of Justice, to enable this politicization of an institution that really owes its obligations to the American people, and the blind scale of justice, which is something that the Department of Justice, of course, has always valued and been. We have seen in a number of proposals in Project 2025 efforts to actually change enforcement priorities at the Department of Justice, seeking to erode civil rights as opposed to protecting them, seeking to erode voting rights as opposed to protecting them. And then, of course, this other retributive list. Earlier today, as we were getting on this webinar, there was reporting out that there is already a list being circulated of individuals that would be barred from federal service. A Heritage Foundation funded or associated organization over the summer said they were going to start listing civil servants on a website to target them. And all of this is really part of this erosion of the independence of so many of these functions, including at the Department of Justice. I don't know if Rotimi or the Congresswoman have more to say there, but I think that's some of the mechanical ways this would play out.
Well, if I may just add that the first action that he will take in order to ensure his program of revenge and criminalization of individuals that he dislikes or he disagrees with is whom he decides to support for that position. And you will see that the individual that he decides to support for that position will be someone that will do exactly as they're told. They buy into the president's agenda, and they will be carrying out whatever they think they can be successful with. We saw some of that from Trump already in attempting to criminalize Hillary Clinton and to have her thrown into jail. And there are others that are mentioned that he attacked in an effort to imprison them. And so, again, starting with his choice to head the Department of Justice, and then doing everything that he can to escape the laws that protect against his kind of weaponization of that office. And so I think that's important to note that that's what he plans on doing right away.
Can I throw out a question to you, Rotimi?
Yes.
So I think maybe a lot of casual followers of politics are a little skeptical that Trump actually could prosecute his political opponents. They sort of take it for granted that things like courts and grand juries would stand in the way of that. And I think there's actually some legitimacy to the idea that it would be a little harder than maybe people anticipate to out and out prosecute someone totally without cause. You would run into obstacles. But it seems to me, and we had a cover story on this in the October issue of the New Republic. We encourage everyone to check that out. It seems to me that Trump wouldn't have to actually prosecute to use the DOJ as a weapon against political opponents. One could envision a scenario a little like this. You know, he's on the phone with his AG, which, as the Congresswoman pointed out, is going to be an essential choice in all this. He's on the phone and he sees George Conway criticizing him on TV, or newly minted Senator Adam Schiff. And he says, you know, God damn it, that SOB, I'm so sick of him. You know, I heard through the grapevine that his businesses are kind of weird. Someone should look at that. And then it filters down through the chain at DOJ to maybe an ambitious U.S. attorney who says, you know, that is kind of curious. Maybe we should start an investigation. And then that ends up being very harassing and destabilizing to a person and could be a way to cow political dissent, right? Can you talk about what that would look like, this type of use of investigations as opposed to out and out prosecutions to use DOJ as a weapon?
Definitely. I think something that I always think about when I think about this is Trump at a rally, and he said this in many rallies when he speaks, is he says, I am your retribution. And everyone knows that he's not talking about being everyone else's retribution. He's talking about his own retribution and fighting people that have been against him. And I think you can see that in the way that he will select U.S. attorneys around the country. So if folks aren't aware of this at home, there are U.S. attorneys across the country that are set up in certain locations. So I'm here in Philadelphia and the Eastern District of Pennsylvania. And so we have a U.S. attorney that represents our area here. And the president selects the people that go into those roles. So in the situation that Greg lays out, one of the U.S. attorneys in California will likely be tasked with in that hypothetical scenario. And that person will be a Trump appointee. And so that person is going to have the discretion and the total control to carry out an investigation. And the folks in the U.S. attorney's office in that California branch, hundreds of employees will likely be appointed also by that same folk that was appointed from Trump, and they're going to be carrying out that investigation hypothetical world. And the reason why that should concern us all is you really have this whole of government approach that Trump is using for his own retribution, not just in DC, but in so many other places where the federal government is positioned, using his power to really take over the government in different places in all 50 states. And that's why I am so really happy we're having this conversation, because the intricacy of this plan, I think Republicans have always had and put out visions for what they want to do to the country. You know, they had the Contract to America with Newt Gingrich, and they always have these really lofty ideas, but the detail and really the way they've thought about implementing this all over the country is just so concerning.
It is. Skye, can I ask you to pick this up a little bit? What other things could a determined President Trump do to harass, bully, encourage, I guess encourage is a euphemistic way to put it, but harassment, bullying of critics, ways of stifling dissent, ways of encouraging people to self-censor rather than face some sort of action by the federal government. We're talking about what? IRS investigations. What's the gamut here? What are the different tools that someone like Trump could use? And what does Project 2025 have to say about that stuff?
Well, many of them are laid out in Project 2025. There are proposals to undermine our free press through the Federal Communications Commission, through threatening the licenses of certain broadcasting. We see that there. Of course, there are proposals to throughout Project 2025 to retaliate against sort of programs, federal service, independent officers of the federal government. These are independent employees. There are 2.2 million career civil servants. They take an oath to the Constitution, not to a particular president or a particular political party, and they owe a duty to the American people. And they carry out their jobs every day, from helping our Food and Drug Administration keep our food and medication safe and effective, to helping to combat climate change and a range of other things. And there are proposals to undermine the independence of that civil service, to threaten or mass purge multiple jobs throughout the federal government, which is not just a harm to the individual civil servants, it's a harm to the overall American people who are relying on these people to carry on the work. We see a retributive agenda with respect to NOAA, which is where our National Weather Service, the data that is that undergirds our National Weather Service, the Project 2025 calls those facts and evidence a sort of politicized climate change machine, or something to that effect, really saying that they would even dismantle and cut off funding for core programs when the facts and evidence don't match up to this vision of misinformed reality that we see the far right really plummeting. So there's a range of there's really a range of these examples. One thing we saw in the prior administration that Democracy Forward had to go to court to stop was politicizing federal grants to communities and community programs across the country, cutting off federal funding without explanation, without adequate explanation. Thankfully, we were able to get the courts to stop that. But those are the types of tactics that we see outlined both in Project 2025, and we have seen in prior in prior examples in the administration. There was a question in the chat, Greg, about taking this one step further to our economy and to things like the Federal Reserve. And I would just note that for those who are business minded or are following or care about the economy, there are a range of things in Project 2025 that would politicize and undermine the stability of our overall economic system, suggesting that the president should be involved and potentially even setting interest rates. And you see business leaders like Jeff Rakes and others who have written for Forbes magazine and other outlets about the dangers to business of Project 2025. And so I think that this is really quite expansive and highly concerning for the American people.
Thank you, Skye. Congresswoman, can I bring you in and on the question of the role of Congress here? I think maybe a lot of people are unaware of just how, I guess, magnified a Republican Congress would actually be if they win the election, meaning if Trump is elected president, Republicans control the Senate and the House in 2025. Those who were willing to stand up to Trump among Republicans have all been purged and cast out of the party, pretty much all of them anyway. I think all of them except for Mitt Romney, just about. They've kind of followed the fate that Liz Cheney has. So what is the sort of nightmare scenario, do you think, when it comes to what a magnified Congress and President Trump could do, kind of following the broad agenda laid out in Project 2025? What's the nightmare scenario there?
Well, that is a very scary proposition that you just, alluded to. The first thing is, that we have members on the opposite side of the aisle who like to carry weapons. And so prior to losing the House, we had to put up the machinery to detect whether or not a weapon was being carried into the House. When they took over and got the speakership, they got rid of that. So I anticipate that the weapon carriers will be back on the office, on the floor, and that they will threaten members on the opposite side of the aisle. I also believe that there will be the most outrageous kinds of legislation that will be attempted. Marjorie Taylor Greene and some of the others believe we should get rid of the Constitution of the United States of America, and they will do everything that they can to move that kind of agenda, not even understanding how the Constitution of the United States is organized and ways by which it can or cannot be amended. They will try everything in their power to dismiss all of that and try and come up with legislation that would either get rid of, they think, or undermine in ways without it being amended through a laborious process that it would take to even amend the Constitution. The other thing that is so scary even right now is that with Trump in power, the domestic terrorists will be strengthened. We have represented in the House of Representatives everything from the Proud Boys to QAnon to the Oath Keepers, on and on and on. And I think not only will they be more brazen, but the ones who belong to the organization outside of the House of Representatives will be welcomed into the House of Representatives, into the Senate in so many different ways. And the other thing that we must really be concerned about is if he does not win, he's going to claim that he has won and that has been stolen. And I understand that they are organizing the army of God, the soldiers of God, in a religious movement to do something similar to what was done January 6th. And so I just think that we could look forward to a totally disruptive situation that we will be in. It will be the kind of struggle that is hard to imagine. And I don't think that we can work anything out to get them to be less violent acting more cooperative, we would be at a great disadvantage if what you just described could take place. It would be an America that most people could not have conceived of any time in the history of this nation.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I'd like to pick up on something that you said there, because I feel like it doesn't get enough discussion. Rotimi, maybe you could take this. The degree to which Project 2025 represents or reflects kind of the impulses of Christian nationalists is sort of a topic that's often overlooked. Can you talk a little bit about how Project 2025 sort of is a document of Christian nationalism in certain respects? Anyway, we've seen a lot of reporting saying that some of the movers behind it are devoted Christian nationalists and so forth. I know there's controversy around the term Christian nationalism. If you want to address that, it's fine, up to you. What should listeners be aware of when it comes to that kind of synchronicity?
Well, I'm worried about the way that they talk about education and the privatization of education, because I believe that in that kind of vision, it is that they will have more schools and more opportunities to be involved with our young people and our children, and to indoctrinate and to, educate them in ways that they believe their religion dictates. I believe the same thing happens in foster care. They want to undermine foster care as we know it, and I do believe they want to take it over so that they will have an opportunity again to indoctrinate our children. I do believe that the Christian nationalists, as you have kind of referred to them and as they're being referred to, are very much involved in the reorganization of the way government works, and that they are not only be appointees in strategic positions, but they will be the ones that will have control of the so-called nonprofits, and they will be the ones that will be administering and carrying out their programs supported by the MAGA Republicans. And so I think there are many ways that these things can be done, but that's just a few of them.
Rotimi, do you want to pick that up? Rotimi?
Yeah, I think the Congresswoman raises a good point, specifically with education. And there was something that was happening in the last couple of weeks. Some folks might have seen it at home, but in a state in the South, there was litigation regarding school funding for Bibles in school. And it's been jumping around in the courts, but I think that is an example of something we are going to see with Project 2025. School funding should not be used for religious materials, period. And I don't think that's really a Democrat idea. Frankly, for a while, that was an American idea. That was something our founders believed, that the government, church, and state was separated. We saw that echoed in so many Supreme Courts. So it's ridiculous that you now have the Republican Party, who was once in support of this really fundamental constitutional idea that church and state were separated, now revoking that idea, ripping that away from our national American story, and simply inserting their own religion into it. So things like that with education really concern me. I really think that the fact that they have now taken this religious idea and they found the people around the country to properly go out and institute it is what is also concerning to me. The quickness, usually there's always staffing issues with implementing many of these ideas, but the fact that the Heritage Foundation has now simply set up a staffing group to put in these ideas, these radical ideas, in such a quick way also is something that very much should really worry us. And I'm going to jump to this point because Greg, you brought it up, and I've been hearing it talked about a little bit. A couple of weeks ago, Chris Levita, Trump's campaign manager, was asked about the election results and said that the election doesn't end on election day; it ends on January 21st. Basically insinuating that whoever gets to the Bible first on the steps of the Capitol is going to be the president. And that already tells me that the way that they're viewing the election is that the results will happen and they will fight in court to get the results that they want. And that is the most anti-American idea I've frankly ever heard, saying that you want to, that no matter what the results are, you're going to take it to court, and the election is not decided on election day. It's decided on January 21st. And I just, again, want to bring that up because that is the most scary part to me, is that they really don't believe in results. They want to play it out to however long it takes and whatever happens in the court system. And I'm confident that our court, again, will reject this notion. We've seen Republican judges reject this, that were put in by Bush, even some that were put in by Trump, reject what's happening. So I think this idea of fighting against democracy in combination with this religious theocracy view is just so scary, and it's just really dangerous.
Can I ask, Skye, would you mind picking up on that? It seems to me that what Rotimi's getting at there is really a fundamental truth about all this that is often overlooked, which is that the MAGA movement and the movement that created Project 2025 and the aspirations reflected in that document, these people do not accept the fundamental legitimacy of elections that they lose. It is literally a viewpoint which holds that only elections that they win are legitimate. Can you talk about that a little bit, about that bigger picture?
Well, you know, we saw this actually starting in 2017. We don't even have to go as early as 2020, but in 2017, when the former president lost the popular vote, but won the Electoral College, one of the first actions that the prior administration took was to set up something called the Pence-Kobach Voter Commission, which was essentially a commission to intimidate voters in certain states, including voters of color and voters in communities of color, in order to suggest that there had been voter fraud. The voting commission, we at Democracy Forward sued to stop it along with other organizations, but it never found any instances of voter fraud. And it was really just a political effort to deny the truth, which was that the majority of people in this country did vote for Secretary Clinton, even though under our system with the Electoral College, the former president was able to accede to the presidency. We then saw that, and I think that we forget because there were so many anti-democratic actions taken in the former administration that sort of memories have waned there. But then we saw, of course, in 2020, more broader scale efforts to deny the election, to actually disrupt the transition of power. And we continue to see a range of people and organizations, including candidates, say that they still don't accept or won't admit that the 2020 election went the way it did. If you look at the funding networks behind many of the organizations engaged with Project 2025, you do find, first of all, this nationalistic, Christian nationalistic themes and organizations like the Alliance for Defending Freedom that have been behind restrictions on medication abortion or restrictions on abortion access, that were behind efforts to overturn Roe versus Wade, are part of Project 2025 and in that group of organizations. But you also find organizations that have been aligned with funding institutions or others that have been engaged in this election denialism, whether that is through fringe legal theories like the independent theory of the state legislature. Do we all remember that? Or other sort of fringe positions that they're taking in litigation. That brings us back, of course, to the theme where you started us with, Greg, which is what Project 2025 really represents in our country at this time. When you poll the American people, the vast majority reject this extremism. The approval ratings of Project 2025 are so low that actually, we have a lot of efforts by political candidates and movements to distance themselves from these policies because there's no mandate for them. But if you have a movement that doesn't really care about winning people over, but they more care about their own power, they will use, whether it is the courts or whether it is gerrymandering or election denialism or other types of anti-democratic mechanisms to be able to advance their agenda. And I think that is the real concern. We're already seeing it happen in some states. We litigate in cases all the time where we're already seeing it happen in some courts and in court cases, many of these things that are in Project 2025. And then, of course, there's a fear that this could happen at the federal level, too.
Thanks, Skye. Congresswoman, would you talk a little bit about reproductive rights? This is a topic we haven't really touched on today, but Project 2025 has a lot to say about that. Where do you see things going under President Trump and a Republican Congress? Is there any doubt that they would try to pass an abortion ban?
Well,
National ban?
I do believe that Trump, no matter what he says, is supportive of a national ban. I do believe that, you know, he worked with the Supreme Court on Roe versus Wade, as he did on immunity, which I just never thought could happen. But on reproductive rights, one of the good things that have happened in this campaign is that women have truly become alive. They've come alive to protect our rights by, to make decisions about our bodies, have been educated even more, understand the real danger of Trump and the mega Republicans and how they lie about abortions. And, one of the most ridiculous things that Trump has said is that, women are doing taking abortions at 9 months. Every woman knows that's a lie. And so I think what have happened is we have galvanized the great number of women around this issue who are prepared to vote, give their vote based on this issue. And I think the women's vote is going to be huge. It's going to be large. And I think it's because of the tremendous work that has gone into educating and informing and unfolding and all of that. And I do have to give the vice president a lot of credit on that. Kamala has done a great job on reproductive rights. We have a great caucus in the House of Representatives. I started back on this issue with Gloria Steinem and Bella Abzug years ago when they were accusing us of just, burning our panties or something. I don't know. And so I tell you, we've come a long way on this issue. Try as they may, even if they're able to get a ban, women will not stand for it. The only thing that I fear is that, women and young girls will have to go to back alley abortions, but we will not give up on our right to have an abortion, and we'll continue to fight no matter what happens.
Congresswoman, thank you very much. I would like to throw out another question entirely. It seems to me that one of the dangers of the Project 2025 agenda, especially concerning Schedule F, which whoever takes this question can explain to listeners, is really the corruption of government information. The government provides a lot of information to the public. It helps people understand the world around them and make sense of it and understand the status of certain policies and so forth. One of my big fears, and we wrote about this in our cover story in October as well, please check that out, everyone, is that the installation of loyalists throughout the government will really corrupt government information in a way we can't even anticipate. Talking about jobs reports, I think somebody brought up the weather earlier, but really there's a whole range of different things that could be completely corrupted and no one will know whether they can even trust government information anymore. Would one of you pick that up and explain what that could look like? What are the different types of info that could get corrupted and how would that happen?
I'm happy to start, Greg. I mean, throughout Project 2025, there's really attacks on facts and evidence and data, and whether that is data around weather patterns in our national, climate service and weather service, or whether it is data regarding demographic information of people to understand disparities or inequities. There are a range of plans to undermine the collection of, the analysis of, and to even manipulate data. That is something that at Democracy Forward, we had to sue the former administration when they sought to stop collecting wage data regarding how much people made, with their demographic characteristics, to sort of deny that there might be pay inequities. Thinking about this because of Lilly Ledbetter recently passing away, but they really sought to deny any of these inequities and just wanted to change the facts. And then, of course, there were a number of concerns about the manipulation of data at the CDC or at the EPA. What we also saw and had published through Freedom of Information Act requests and other information that we were able to gain was a real communications line between very far right media outlets and those who were, sitting in senior positions in the administration. And so I think that whether you look at it through Project 2025 lens or whether you look at it through the lens of prior administration and what they did, there is a reason to be very concerned about the denial of facts and evidence and reality and data manipulation. And that can happen, of course, by undermining our civil service and undermining the civil servants that are working in these agencies every day, collecting and analyzing data, seeking to politicize those. It can happen through cutting off funding for certain programs and data collection efforts. And it can also happen through just root manipulation or discontinuation. And we see all of those, we see sort of previews of all of those things in Project 2025 or in the former and prior administration's record. So that is a piece of this, and it fits in with election denialism, doesn't it? Because it's, again, this not wanting to be constrained by the American people and not wanting to be constrained by facts and science and data and evidence. It's all part of an anti-democratic or more autocratic agenda.
Thank you very much, Skye. I think we can go to listeners' questions now. Okay. One question that we've got here is, hang on, guys. What sort of extreme and destructive executive orders could Donald Trump immediately start with as president? Rotimi, you want to take that? I mean, what would we really see right off the bat, do you think?
So when thinking about executive orders, I think the interesting thing about that question is the way Project 2025 is set up is that it's a kind of like a menu of executive orders the president will take. So again, for me, I think the executive orders regarding the Attorney General's office, what he's going to be directing as Attorney General is to do, is very concerning. I think that's one that really stands out to me. I think in particular, his executive orders around changing the Department of Education are very concerning to me. So I think when talking about which executive order is going to be kind of the most disastrous one, it's almost asking what is going to be the worst, what is the worst case scenario of all the worst case scenarios? And I think that's what makes this so dangerous, is that it is so well thought out. The people behind this have been thinking for so long. They've really spent so much time thinking about how they can really use the power of the president to remove and roll back the progress of the country. And I'd even argue this is something that Republicans have been thinking about for a long time. The conservative movement has been thinking about for years. If you look at even our Supreme Court justices, you look at John Roberts, what he was doing before he was a Supreme Court justice, when he was at the Department of Justice, and he was working at rolling back voting rights. And then when he got confirmed to the Supreme Court, the Shelby v. Holder decision comes out, and he completely weakens the Voting Rights Act, removes Section 2, weakens Section 2, weakens Section 5, weakens Section 3, crucial parts of the Voting Rights Act that are focused on making sure that voting rights laws are not being racist and discriminatory as they were during the civil rights era. And that type of thinking about executive power and the power of the president has been festering for a long time in the conservative movement. And now it's finally being given kind of the teeth that it needs to actually be implemented. So to answer that question, I really think it's a menu of the worst case scenarios and so many different executive orders that could really just destroy our country.
Thank you very much. Let's take another question from a listener. Are there any major conservative voices that are warning against Project 2025? It's a really interesting question, and I think what it goes to is the core of what's happened to the Republican Party under Trump, the degree to which it has embraced authoritarianism and specifically turned its governing agenda over to him. I do think there will be some tussles in the first Trump administration. He kind of outsourced a bunch of policy to congressional Republicans. I think that won't happen as much because the people at Project 2025 and the other allies of the president are really not going to want any sort of Paul Ryan types to dictate policy. They're going to really try to exert control over it. Does someone want to pick that up? What is it? Are there any conservatives out there who are warning about the Project 2025 agenda? And if not, what does that say? Congresswoman or?
Well, I wish they'd speak up now. They're awfully quiet. Listen, I never thought that Republicans would support the lie that Donald Trump actually won the election. And they keep saying that. They won't say they don't believe that. I never thought that they would look at the insurrection that took place in the Capitol and said these were just protesters, with their rights to protest instead of what they really were. I never thought that I would see the lack of patriotism that has emerged from the Republican side of the aisle. I never thought that I would see the lack of support for families, where the attack on women would be just so outrageous. And so I have no confidence in the Republican Party being the old Republican Party, even if I didn't agree with that, and they were much more conservative than I would like. What we have now are Republicans who are either afraid of Donald Trump, or this is what they believed all the time, and they had not exposed it because they thought that perhaps they would get too much resistance to it. But the fact of the matter is, I don't trust that the Republican Party is an independent Republican Party, that it is now the Donald Trump Party. And I'm worried about it because if, by some chance, he became the commander-in-chief, and you talk about executive orders, I don't know what he might do in ordering our troops where he wanted them, against whomever he wanted them, even domestically.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I think some people in the chat here have suggested Charlie Sykes as someone conservatives come out against Project 2025, maybe Bill Kristol. It's really quite sobering how few voices there are. Another question, maybe Skye, you could take this one. One listener wants us to discuss the future of union organizing under Project 2025, and more broadly, maybe we should talk about what will become a worker power. President Biden is probably the most pro-labor president in decades. The ticket of Trump and J.D. Vance talks a big game about being populists, pro-worker. J.D. Vance actually does seem to have at times in his life been serious about worker power. What can we expect on that, Skye?
Well, the Project 2025 seeks to reverse so many of the gains that the Biden administration has made, including gains that will qualify millions of people for overtime pay, which is something that's also being challenged by far-right extreme attorneys general and other special interests in the courts, but it's a policy reversal. They seek to undermine and take away the charter of the National Education Association, the NEA. The Project 2025 would undermine collective bargaining and lots of protections for our workforce. And so we do think it's definitely a threat to not only our democracy, but also people's pocketbooks, which is inextricably linked, of course, to the ability of people to really access and participate in our society fully. The People's Guide, which I'll just highlight again at democracy4.org, does outline many of the, I think, often overlooked harms that are baked into Project 2025, where I think they may be hoping that people aren't paying attention to them so much, because they do affect the everyday lives of Americans, including our ability to organize and the ability of workers to be paid fairly and to be protected. So it's a big problem for workers across the country. And that's again, I think why we're seeing people try to distance themselves from it, even though if you actually look at the policies they propose, they're very similar to Project 2025.
Thanks, Skye. Another question from listeners, viewers. If Schedule F is implemented and huge numbers of civil servants lost their jobs, would the government be able to function? Rotimi, can I ask, on that score, I think imagining a scenario in which many Trump loyalists were installed in these key spots, what would be the kind of day-to-day impact on actual governing? How would the American people experience this directly themselves?
And so I really appreciate this question because I think it's something that really hasn't been addressed. And one really, frankly, I'm just going to say insane thing that I've seen talked about this is Donald Trump and Elon Musk have been talking very constantly about starting this new government organization called the Department of Government Efficiency. Elon has basically tagged this name as a Bitcoin that he's working on called Dogecoin. Just shows you how serious they take this kind of stuff. But their idea is that Elon Musk would have some sort of role in making the government more efficient by firing people, assuming they would use Schedule F. And Elon has said that the way that he views this is the way that he essentially, when he bought Twitter, he fired a ton of people. And what you saw was Twitter in the first couple months had a lot of issues with the way that it was running. It was shutting down constantly. There were blackouts. And then it looks like things are still working awfully for the most part. And there's a lot of issues there. But that kind of shows me is that they want to take the type of thinking that they used to run Twitter and X and implement that to the government. And what you're going to have is a blackout on Twitter. You know, we all saw when that happened, it was a weird moment and we all moved down, but a blackout in the government where veterans and working people can't get access to the medication they need is a crisis. It's not a joke, it's a crisis. So it's been really disheartening to me seeing Elon Musk, seeing Donald Trump have this idea about, oh, government efficiency. We're going to treat the government and run it like a business. Your conservatives say this all the time, where this is not a business. This is real people's lives that are going to be impacted. They're real people that depend on the government for resources, for aid, and so many veterans. And we're just going to treat it like we're running X or Twitter or whatever. It's really preposterous and it's really ridiculous.
Thanks very much. Another question, I'm going to paraphrase it. One listener wants to know why it is that so many Americans are responding to Donald Trump's delusional vision of government, the policies he lays out. I think that's a hard question. You know, I mean, I think to a degree we didn't see in 2016 or 2020. He's just throwing one completely crackpot thing out after another out there. Tariffs across the board, all the way up to 2,000%. I think he said at one point, mass deportations undertaken with the military. I think we lost Congresswoman Waters there, but Skye, would you pick that up? Why are people, to the degree that they are, well, here's Congresswoman, no. Skye, why don't you take it? Why are people responding to Donald Trump's vision of government this way, and what can be done about that?
First of all, I'll say, I think, Project 2025 is being revealed and exposed for what it is, which is an effort to dismantle our freedoms and our democracy and take away things from the American people that they've long enjoyed. The Congresswoman may have some comments on this as well, but I think that is, we know that there is no mandate for this extremism, we've seen that for a period of months now, which is why I think there are many manipulative efforts to try to distance from Project 2025, to try to claim that this is some other thing, when we know it's not. I testified recently before Congress a few weeks ago at a hearing where the Republicans called. I was a guest of the ranking member in the Democratic caucus. And at that hearing, I was the only person on the dais who had not authored a chapter of and was not from an organization that supported Project 2025. So I think that's why we're seeing these efforts to distance. I do believe this is certainly an urgent year, and we need to make sure that most people and that people are connecting the dots of this anti-democratic behavior to the networks responsible for it, and then to their ultimate power to vote. But I will say, I think that we have seen time and again that that this extremism is not anything that has a mandate among the American people. And I'm sure that the Congresswoman Waters may have some more to say on that.
Well, let me just say that, you know, when Trump attempts to deny his involvement with Project 2025, he basically knows that there are a substantial number of people in this country who disapprove of some of the things that he has demonstrated already. And he knows that his policies in 2025 are not accepted, but he is convinced that if he's the president, he doesn't care whether or not they accept it. He's going to drive some of this stuff home. They have been demonstrating this in so many ways. Look, I can recall when we did the Dodd-Frank reform, how consumers had nowhere to turn in government in order to get some help about everything from payday loans to all kind of rip-off efforts, et cetera. We created the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau to protect consumers. They hate it. They have tried everything that they could try to destroy it, including going to the Supreme Court, trying to take away that they're funded, on and on and on. There are any number of instances that you could see their hand at, and what they have tried to do, which Trump would do if he's president of the United States of America. He does not necessarily want people to know right now everything that he's going to do, but he's such a liar. They need to know and understand that he is lying, that the development of Project 2025 is with the assistance of so many people that have worked for him, his allies, his former personnel, and et cetera, et cetera. And so he is not to believe when he said, "Oh, I'm not involved in that," or I'm not the one that's developing that. It is not true. And, you know, if he could get cornered by a very investigative and inquisitive media on some of these issues that will show his support of polluters and his support, you know, of corporations that are basically cheating the public right now, they could catch him. They could corner him. We need a more aggressive press to really get after him on some of his past actions that are synonymous with what's in Project 2025.
Congresswoman, thank you so much. We have time for one more question. I guess it's Rotimi's turn. So I'll throw this one out to you. What are the prospects exactly for resisting implementation of a Project 2025 agenda in a worst case scenario? Obviously, there would be a whole lot of lawsuits against this or that thing that they try, but would those be of limited utility? And what other means do you expect could be employed to thwart the worst Project 2025 designs?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think for me, it's watching. I think there are a couple different things I'm thinking about. I think there's on the ground, I think individual organizing, as we've seen in this country so many times, when we have political figures stand up and want to take over people's civil rights, you know, the first thing we do is we protest and we use our First Amendment rights, our freedom of speech, and speak out against some of this horrific stuff that is in Project 2025. Also, I think it's empowering organizations like the organization Skye is with, the ACLU, so many groups that are in the forefront and will be in court litigating against Project 25, supporting organizations like that. And I think that's so important. I think it's really empowering media, really using our resources to make sure that we're paying for strong media and strong reporters, as the Congresswoman said, that are going to be going out and asking the president, or hopefully not the president, asking Trump, asking Vance, saying, what the hell are you doing, really? You know, what are you guys up to in the White House? God forbid. I think that's where I'm thinking. I'm really using the levers of our civil society to make sure that we're holding people accountable, because if no one does that. They're going to be allowed to do whatever the hell they want. I don't want to see that happen to our country.
Well, hopefully it won't come to that, everybody. Just want to thank all of you for joining this. We're out of time. Thank you so much to our panelists, and thanks so much to the audience for joining and for your questions. Check out Democracy Forward, their report on all this. Rotimi Adeoye writes for the Daily Beast. You can check out his stuff over there. The Congresswoman, you all know how to keep tabs on the Congresswoman and see what she's up to. And over at the New Republic, we cover this stuff very regularly. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Skye, good to see you again.
Good to see you, Congresswoman Waters. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Everyone.